Fallout New Vegas is one of my favorite RPGs. I first played it around 2011 and was smitten ever since. If you're checking out this video, I'm betting you must be a fan as well. Well, good to have you, Courier. We can sing our favorite radio tunes together. I'll start. I got spurred about 200 hours in New Vegas. A lot of that is thanks to a variety of strengths, its embracing of interesting character builds, its quality world building, the incredible dialogue, and the joy of just existing in the Mojave Wasteland. I mean, there's a giant dinosaur that's a souvenir shop and a guard tower. That's awesome. While I do understand its appeal, Fallout 3 and 4 didn't click for me as it did for others, and while I have played the original and yet to play 2, New Vegas really does it for me. But as much as I love this game, there's a question I've been pondering for a while. How are the Fallout New Vegas DLCs? I want to explore and answer that question in this video. I'm going to play through them all and talk about what I find interesting, starting with Honest Hearts, then moving on to Old World Blues, Dead Money, and then capping off with Lonesome Road. Your time is important, and this video is pretty long, so it's split into sections so you can hop to whichever one interests you when viewing. With that said, get comfortable, maybe twist open a sunset sarsaparilla if you got it, and let's rock and roll. Honest Hearts was the first expansion released for New Vegas, taking the experience in a different direction from the base game. When I finished my playthrough, returning to the Mojave Wasteland, I wondered about humanity's habit for conflict, when it's justifiable, and the role belief has in our lives. Those are quite the heavy topics, right? Well, welcome to Honest Hearts. It starts straightforward enough. The Happy Trails caravan is looking for a hired gun to travel to Zion National Park, and having a Pip-Boy on hand is a massive plus. But things go sour real quick when your caravan is attacked, with you being the only survivor. You make contact with Follows Chalk, a resident of the park, and sent to their leader, a figure you've heard about on the road, the Burned Man, Joshua Graham. Honest Hearts was an experience that I had a hard time getting into. I made 2 previous attempts before one really stuck and I saw it through. I want to briefly mention that first try right at this setup, because this was the scene of the crime. In my first skinny dip into Honest Hearts, I was playing a sniper character. My build had to focus on stealth and shooting before they shot me. There's a set piece right when all your caravan members bite the dust with the White Legs ambush. It all occurs through gameplay, so I picked off the enemies, and because of my high perception, I caught an unsuspecting figure across the bridge. So I brought up my rifle, pointed at my target, and fired. The bullet flies into the enemy, metal contacting with flesh and bone, bringing him down to the ground as the ambience of the wilderness resumes. And when I made contact with the people of Zion, I was met with war clubs and bullets. What a weird expansion, I thought to myself. Even key players in the DLC wanted to do me in. Turns out that the person I shot wasn't actually an enemy, it was the companion Follows Chalk. He takes out an enemy to save you, and I accidentally thanked him with a .308 caliber bullet, turning all the key players into hostile enemies that led me to fighting the entire canyon to escape. That was my initial experience with Honest Hearts, and it left a bad taste in my mouth, how easy it was to break the intended experience for my first playthrough. And I tell this story both as an example of a darkly comedical player mistake, but also to highlight that even with that experience fresh in my memory, I still enjoyed Honest Hearts. Regardless of which Fallout game is your favorite, the series does a great job at encouraging players to explore, picking landmarks and curiosities to draw the eyes, quests often being vehicles to check stuff out. One of the bits I find interesting about Honest Hearts is how it still accomplishes this with its own flavor. Think about the Mojave Wasteland, stretches of desert as far as the eye can see, ruins of towns or buildings, the signs and grandeur of the Vegas Strip. There was a balance between urban exploration and the dusty landscape. Honest Hearts places its focus on nature, vistas carved from rock rather than man-made structures. There's fresh water, untainted by radiation you can drink. And with this focus on being a park, there's plenty of wildlife, mole and regular rats, coyotes, spore creatures, geckos, cazadors, scorpions, yaoguai, and these mantis that hit like a death claw. When gazing across the canyon, Zion has an expansive visual scope. But when you pull up your map, it's packed with locations and small enough to feel intimate. Like if you spent enough time here, you could figure out the trails and landmarks to traverse the park with ease. In that respect, it reminded me of the game Firewatch, where traversing Shoshone was the main mechanical interaction, and the abandoned watchtowers sure made that a fun connection to make. There are still buildings to pop your nose into, like fishing lodges, spots that are taboo to the other tribes. While Zion does have signs of the apocalypse, abandoned picnic grounds, vehicle wreckage, and the occasional remains lying about, with most of it being nature, it shows there are worse places to be in the apocalypse. The people before the war may have met a cruel end, but Zion? That place is thriving. As sure as the sun rises in the sky. When I travel through the Mojave, sounds I often think about are from the radio. The static paired with the voice of Mr. New Vegas, now that's a man with max charisma. Or the music from the radio stations. Heartaches by the Number, Nat King Cole's Love Me Like There's No Tomorrow, or Peggy Lee's Johnny Guitar. My go-to sound when thinking about Honest Hearts is Rain in the Canyons. It doesn't occur all the time, but it happened enough to leave an impression. The quest in Honest Hearts send you out to get a hold of some pre-war items, and I thought it was cool the multiple ways to create a solution, like trying to fix a piece of technology with a repair skill or using parts from something else. It's great that this stays consistent with New Vegas being an RPG that can be approached with different skills or abilities in its quests. And while you explore, besides the straightforward narrative, there's a smaller one about the survivalist, a military man whose journal entries are scattered throughout the park. It's completely optional, and while I didn't find all the entries on my playthrough, the parts I found were great. Going off the timeline, the survivalist has been dead for over 100 years, yet his messages seem fresh to the scavenger who decides to read them. His sorrows, his joys, and what he ultimately did with the time he had left is so human. It's both beautiful and sad. And this all occurs through text, which is crazy. That's most of the gameplay-based parts of Honest Hearts, and it's about time to talk about the rootinest, tootinest, 45 caliber shootinest vengeance paladin of Zion, Joshua Graham. Here's a quick refresher on the man himself. Get comfortable or break out a snack. I'll make this brief. Back in the day, there existed a group called the New Canaanites, a tribe of Mormons who were known to be tough customers. Handling a 45 caliber pistol was a vital skill for the group. But there was one member who the Canaanites had shame for, known as the most dangerous and meanest of them. That man was Joshua Graham. He served the one who would be known as Caesar for 30 years, taking the title Malthus Legate. What made Graham such a powerful force wasn't his tactics, rather his brutality in battle, a fear that spread like wildfire among enemies and allies alike. After the failed attempt to take the Hoover Dam from the NCR, Caesar punished his legate. He was doused in pitch, lit aflame, and thrown into the Great Canyon. As powerful as Caesar is, Joshua Graham was a name that he refused to bring attention to. Any mention of him or the burned man would not be tolerated by the Legion. In that sense, he was wiped from history, except in Caesar's nightmares. As the story goes, Joshua Graham crawled his way out of the canyon and now resides in Zion National Park. This is the man who sits before us, maintaining an arsenal of pistols as he speaks to the outsider, in the heart of the Dead Horses tribe. Honest Hearts has other strengths going for it, like the natural landscape of Zion or the survivalist. But Joshua Graham is my favorite part of the experience. There's a contrast to him that I find so captivating. Joshua Graham is a dangerous man, considering himself a tool to exercise God's judgment. If one finds himself against the burned man, God help you, because Graham sure won't. He's the human embodiment of fire and brimstone, and not because of the burned flesh. The antagonists are the Whitelegs, the same tribe that killed your caravan. They also slaughtered the people of New Canaan years ago. And not just the soldiers. Graham and a man named Daniel are the only ones left. This fury is what drives Joshua. Partway through the expansion, he'll pay a visit to the Sorrows camp and he'll quote the Book of Psalms, passage 137, by the rivers of Babylon.
By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down. Yea, we wept, when we remembered Zion. Remember, O Lord, the children of Edom, and the day of Jerusalem, who said, raise it even to the foundation. O daughter of Babylon, who ought to be destroyed, happy shall he be, that rewardeth thee as thou hast served us. Happy shall he be, that taketh and dasheth thy little ones against the stones. Do you know what it means?
First time reading this, it went way over my head, but the game summarizes the message in a dialogue choice. Basically, the Whitelegs are Babylon in this passage, and it is time for divine justice for their conquering. So, this could be a stretch, but I found it an interesting comparison. As I've been playing through the expansions, I resumed my years-long quest to read that classic about that big whale, and what struck me was with the caliber of their fury, how Joshua Graham reminded me of Ahab. In Moby Dick, the captain of the Pequod lost his leg to the white whale, and that accident changed him. He became a shell of who he was. Now spite and revenge is what propels the captain forward on his ivory leg. And the book does an incredible job at conveying how much he hates this whale. There's even a section on page 562 in the chapter The Forge, where instead of tempering a barb with water, Ahab calls over 3 crewmates and performs it with blood and says in Latin, I baptize you, not in the name of the Father, but of the devil, anointing the weapon to kill the white whale. Of course, Graham and Ahab are polar opposites on their perspectives of God. Graham as gospel, Ahab as a cold, unrelenting hatred. But on their viewings of their respective evils, they're so similar. Their foes are not creatures made of this earth, they are so much worse in their eyes. But unlike Ahab, there is another side of Joshua Graham that is just as strong as his fury, and that is compassion. I notice when viewing characters with religion as a strong part of their identity, it's often portrayed as an overzealousness, a hypocrisy of their teachings, and twisted into something darker, full of intolerance and hatred. And that isn't necessarily a bad approach. Variety and perspectives of ideas and experiences are what makes stories so fascinating. And it's that clash of what I've seen before that makes Joshua's approach to Mormonism as a positive aspect of his character really interesting to me. When Joshua crawled out of the Great Canyon, covered in burns to New Canaan before it was destroyed by the Whitelegs, they welcomed him back with open arms. While brutality follows Joshua Graham, it's something he doesn't take an intense pleasure in. As he says through dialogue, I don't enjoy killing, but when done righteously, it's just a chore, like any other. He acts as one who would seek redemption, not to save his soul, but because he places his faith in a higher power and wants to do good for those around him for as long as he stands. If you look up Joshua Graham quotes on the internet, you'll see lines that go hard, like make your first shot count, you won't get a second, or a personal favorite,
We can't expect God to do all the work.
but you'll also find quotes like,
In a world filled with misery and uncertainty, it is a great comfort to know that, in the end, there is light in the darkness.
or,
For many of us, the road is a difficult one, but the path is always there for us to follow, no matter how many times we may fall.
if you ask him, do you ever fall? He says,
Every day. Some days are harder than others.
and one I just learned about. If you disagree with his faith, he chuckles and says, right, you're not so certain. Fair enough. But no matter your creed, Joshua would be the type of person to offer a hand in the darkness and say in a calm voice, I'm here with you, out of an unconditional compassion for the fact that you are human and thus deserve to be loved. I think there's something really beautiful in that. His faith doesn't diminish his character, it strengthens it. He's not just a brutal foe or a compassionate preacher. He's both. The other new Canaanite, Daniel, has a great line about Joshua that nails this duality.
He is a monument both to God's unending forgiveness and to humanity's unfathomable capacity for cruelty. It's written on every inch of his body.
While on the subject, I now want to mention Daniel. He shares a similar faith to Joshua, but is more an average person compared to the instrument of the Lord. Daniel focuses on a more idealistic side of the tribes, capable of defending himself and those he shepherds if need be, but would prefer a peaceful solution. But I found myself not really clicking with Daniel like I did with Joshua, even if I'm more aligned to his ideals. I think a lot comes to Daniel as a person. He's coming from a place that means well, most certainly. But he also conveys that with an attitude of self-righteousness. He has an air of holier than thou and an I know best perspective. It seems prevalent when he talks about the Sorrows, the tribe he looks after, and to you, an outsider, which is in contrast with Graham's respect for you as the person you are. At the expansion's end, there's a split of what's best for the tribes, either taking Joshua's suggestion of gathering the dead horses and the Sorrows to exterminate the Whitelegs, or Daniel's idea to escape from the valley. If you express your alignment with Joshua, Daniel chastises you, saying the two of you don't have a right to force the Sorrows into fighting, which is a fair point. But, I'm well aware of my bias here, what gives him the right to decide the future of the Sorrows? Joshua and Daniel are there to help protect, but Daniel seems to coddle them in a way that views the Sorrows as children, rather than as a functioning tribe that should have agency in their own decisions about their future. But I also think Daniel is written that way intentionally. Daniel doesn't have Joshua's baggage. He hasn't suffered or done evil the way the former Malthus legate has. That isn't a knock on the life Daniel has led. Rather, just showing the contrast to both their perspectives. One has done harm and strives to do better. The other desires peace that could lead to brutality of those he shepherds. In this playthrough, I chose Joshua's approach. I find myself picking non-lethal options in other games if given the choice, yet Joshua made a compelling case to me. The Whitelegs are conquerors. If they find the other tribes, they will kill them. And trying to avoid that conflict in hopes our paths will never cross didn't seem like a good option to me. I figured rallying together to protect their home was important. Zion will last, no matter who's there. So I traversed the rivers with the burned man. His destruction with that sidearm is shockingly potent. And as I walked through the red canyons as the sun set, imagining the river was changing colors as the white legs, dead horses, and sorrows alike began dripping blood from what's left over. I considered if we're really doing the right thing. I thought it was necessary as a player, but I sure didn't feel heroic about it. In the ending slides, I learned the peaceful tribe of the Sorrows became more warlike in their reverence of Joshua Graham. They were safe, but changed. This caused Daniel to exile himself for the rest of his days. There were a few silver linings though. With the tribes uniting, the Happy Trails caravan got a resurgence in business. Follows Chalk got his chance to explore the world, and Joshua Graham was changed after the encounter. He still harbored the brutality for his foes, but he didn't savor it. His inner demons were appeased. I appreciate my time with Honest Hearts. It took me a bit to adjust to what it was going for, but I felt pretty rewarded seeing it through. And it got me to consider some pretty interesting questions, more than I expected. Well played, Honest Hearts. Well played. God be with you. That was some pretty heavy stuff, right? What do you say we take a breather here? Something to tip the mood scales another direction. I'm no prospector, but it looks like we struck comedy gold. Humor has been baked into Fallout's DNA ever since that first title, darkly comedic and absurdist. Bethesda has been contributing to that legacy as well. The Silver Shroud is a strong example that comes to mind. New Vegas has plenty of comedy in the base game. For this playthrough, I made a character with 1 intelligence, and the dialogue had me cackling like the sandiest witch as poor souls were taken aback by my verbal cripplings of logic. If you have the Wild Wasteland trait, the game's wackiness increases. I remember 2 occurrences in Honest Hearts, but much like the other DLCs I'll talk about later, comedy wasn't the focus. Old World Blues, on the other hand, humor and jocularity are the foundations of this experience. Visiting the Mojave Drive-In, a crashed satellite will have a midnight showing, and if you decide to tune in, you'll get the pitch. Back in the day, the brightest minds of the 21st century gathered at the Big Mountain Research and Development Center, forming a think tank to experiment and find solutions to humanity's problems. When the Great War kicked off, it really didn't change much. Atomic power was welcomed into the mix and things seemed alright. That was until October 23rd, 2077. Now the center has gone quiet. A giant crater is what's left of the Big MT, and you've woken up with quite a few scars on your body. A setup like this poses some intrigue. What's going on behind the closed doors and what happened to those great minds? In that sense, it reminds me of BioShock's original pitch to the greatest innovators to come to Rapture. But here's where Old World Blues steers the narrative expectation into another direction. When you walk into the think tank, you meet the doctors. Turns out they've relocated from puppets of meat and bone into machines. Monitors forming into abstract faces as they talk to you, before realizing you can understand them. They call you a lobotomite, and the fact they have a term for this condition implies this has happened many times before. The game even pulls off the reveal as an effective joke. When they announce they took your brain, you're given the brainless perk, along with heartless and spineless, as they figured, what the hell, and decide to take those 2 as there was a sale in your body, one-time offer. Unless, here's where you come in. Thanks to the powers of science, you're doing pretty great, all things considered. And since you have a pair of hands, you gotta go get some technology scattered across the empty. Then deal with the think tank's arch nemesis Dr. Mobius and his army of robo-scorpions. Welcome to Old World Blues. I had a fun time with this expansion. Honest Hearts was great. I thought the narrative stuff was fascinating. While I did appreciate what the open world meant, it felt more like a backdrop, a stage for the themes to take place. Here, the 2 aspects that worked for me was its focus on player exploration and comedy, both surprisingly complementing each other. When talking to the doctors, they want you to grab the tech, then head back ASAP, and you can express your desire to reject that idea and go check out the cool stuff here. What are they gonna do, stop you? They got no hands! So the crater is your oyster. The doctors even give you Mobius's old room, acting as a home base. This small act changes your approach to the wasteland. In the Mojave, you're like a drifter, taking whatever valuables catch your eye and leaving footprints and corpses. There was the Lucky 38 in the base game, but I found myself not really visiting it, besides quests or swapping companions. The sink are the roots that ground you in Old World Blues. Currently, it's missing a lot of key appliances. This is how the humor and gameplay dovetail with each other. You're given a quest to find the missing components. This acts as motivation to get out there. Besides player-based curiosity of noticing locales to check out and new weapons or armors, doing the quests also leads to a new function in your home base. like recustomizing your character, augmenting a special weapon, converting organic matter, and some other stuff. They're marked on the map, so you don't have to worry about where to look. Each one of these have different personalities to talk to. They got some good chuckles out of me. And while you're out there, you're gonna find some funny stuff. Jokes are peppered throughout the expansion, from quips from the doctors or terminal messages to just open world hijinks. An example in the latter case, there's something so absurdist about climbing to the top of a radio tower, ripping off the antenna, and then using it to give a concussion to foes without a brain. I laughed quite a bit with Old World Blues, and I want to share some examples with you. Some are tied to my character build and some not. Here's a universal one. You can find a stealth suit as one of the main objectives, and it'll talk to you when you wear it, letting you know when the Pip-Boy light is on and injecting stim packs when low. As I was walking through crumbled hallways and swiping expired soda bottles from the vending machines, the suit asked, very casually, "Do you like me?" And that had me in stitches. It was so unexpected, and I was thinking that a scientist must have programmed that response and thought, this is a quality of life feature, and that got approved for testing on a stealth suit. My favorite non-character specific example occurs in the X-12 Research Center. There's a terminal where you can skim the document file. It tells of a member of the research team, a Mr. Harris, choked on a buffalo gourd seed and died. Unfortunately, Mr. Harris was donned in a prototype piece of equipment called a Y-17 trauma harness. This tool would override a person's motor functions with artificial muscles and fibers. When the creators saw this, they didn't consider it a bug, but rather a feature. And it's a feature that never got patched out, because with no home base set for the harness, it would continue wandering long after the person died, entering a berserking rage with no capacity to tell friend and foe apart. Such was the case when the rattling skeletal remains of Mr. Harris began attacking the other researchers. So they requested and got approved for a prototype weapon, the K9000 Cyberdog gun. No, it doesn't shoot dogs. I thought so too, but it does use the brain of a robo-canine to act as a heavy-duty chain gun. But one of the researchers must have had butterfingers, as they dropped the all-powerful weapon with plenty of bark down the stairs. The group panicked and sealed most of the center. And Mr. Harris, that's quite the massive weapon you got there. Where did you get it? I love this side story. It's darkly comedic setup with science gone wrong. The absurdity of getting a weapon to deal with the problem only to immediately lose it, making the threat even greater. It's fantastic. Besides the laugh, it also contributes to the overall picture of Old World Blues. Think about it like this. The brightest minds of the 21st century are now just doing experiments, no longer for the good of the future, but rather they're bored and waiting to see what happens. In the game's ending slides, they reference the expansion's title, Old World Blues, as a longing for the past that's so strong, the present and the future are out of view. The entire expansion is a longing for a previous time, one that's played not for drama, but for laughs. One of the doctors of the think tank, Boris, made his research center a high school, a stage for the tragedy of his childhood crush going out with a jock. In exploring it, you need to find terminals. One has the ball player Richie's report card, and all his grades are F-. Exploring these places, it makes the scientists look like a bunch of buffoons, whose high intelligence blinds them to everything else. They're extremely book smart, but with the emotional maturity of a little baby. Here's some other funny bits tied to my build. So, as I mentioned earlier, I was playing a 1 intelligence character with a high charisma. And the cool thing about New Vegas is if you're lacking in a skill for a dialogue choice, you fail the check but are given a joke answer that makes failure really fun. And with a high speech skill, my character was a charismatic idiot that would say something really convincing before revealing he had no idea what he was talking about. And probably my favorite out-of-pocket example, I had the Lady Killer perk on my character, and the game let me seduce light switches. And yes, plural, I did it twice. One teased I said that seductive comment to all the light switches, and my character replied, "You're right, I do." That same perk was useful with one of the doctors of the think tank. Dr. Dalla has this intense draw to humans, and you can play into that, displaying a variety of human functions. I'm pretty sure it works for the female version of that perk too. These bits are so absurd, but that's what makes them great. Much like the base game, Old World Blues lets you express what kind of character you're playing, not just through gameplay styles, but through conversations. And playing into those will lead to more comedic opportunities in the game. It lets your version of the courier play along with the comedy. Do you embrace the absurd premises, act as the straight man to all the hijinks, outright rebel against your role and take yourself seriously, or a messy mix of all the above? That's up to you. You even have a conversation with your own brain near the climax. This expansion is wacky, and this embracing of the chaotic is what makes it feel fresh. It's got a lighter tone compared to the others, having a positive spin in its ending slides. You can come back to the zone once you finish to keep exploring after the story wraps up. I will say, while I enjoy it, I wasn't very engaged in the story like I was with Honest Hearts that really stuck with me. The highlight was the occasional laugh. With that said, Old World Blues was delightful, a nice reprieve from the serious. But the wasteland can be a cruel, dangerous place. So let's be grateful for the memory and take a gamble on the future. Dead Money raises a question I hadn't considered when I first played it in my mid-teens. What if Fallout was a survival horror game? Legends tell of the Sierra Madre, a pre-war casino that was fated for a grand opening, inviting big stars and the public to escape the hardships of life for a one-of-a-kind experience. It's been 2,000 years and the doors are yet to open. But legends have a way of attracting the bold, so you follow the broadcast to an abandoned Brotherhood of Steel bunker, only to be caught off guard and taken near the casino. The copywriters sure made some creative embellishments with the broadcast. This place is now called the City of the Dead, surrounded by a blood-red sky and the mutated inhabitants trapped in radiation suits. You wake up to the voice of Father Elijah, a former member of the Brotherhood of Steel wants to crack the casino vault open. You and the survivors are going to help, and he's not asking. Turns out, you rig the bomb collar on your neck, and if you decide to leave, well, your last delivery is going to be with the Grim Reaper. That's the hook for Dead Money. You're trapped in the city, get a crew together, open the Sierra Madre, and make sure to come back in one piece. After all, the hardest part isn't getting in, it's letting go. So if I were to give a statement of what I think about this expansion, it would be something like this. Dead Money is an example of a game I enjoy talking about more than playing. I really enjoyed the premise, the story is fantastic, and while I understand what they were going for through its mechanics, the gameplay went from interesting and engaging to interesting. I want to flip a roulette table. That's quite the statement, so I'm going to try to articulate where I'm coming from with this. I'm going to categorize this into 3 sections. Getting the squad together, the heist, and the Sierra Madre Casino. The first part is top-notch. You're dropped in the villain neighborhood. The map of Dead Money is much tighter, and with the red clouds lathered across, it feels claustrophobic. This place is not the paradise it was destined to be. Pay attention to some of the terminals scattered across the abandoned buildings, and you can hear this was being built on some shoddy foundations. And I'm not talking about the land itself. If you play Old World Blues before this, you may remember the messages saying they were testing some of their stuff out here, like the gas and chemical suits. Small world, huh? In this part of the game, you'll encounter a few of the ghost harvesters, but it's manageable. You need to destroy their limbs for them to stay dead. With this being a casino town, the currency here are poker chips that can be redeemed at vending machines to get supplies. Some of the codes for other goods can be discovered as well. It also allows you to trade junk items like cartons of cigarettes for currency, which made collecting these useful rather than by misclicking and taking inventory space for no reason. These machines are going to be smoking out of the wazoo when I'm done trading with them. And if you keep your peepers peeled, there's some supply caches with some gear. You'll start off with a new outfit, rocking 0 defense and a hollow rifle, so any extra stuff is a welcome addition. One of these items is a police revolver. And here's a reason why I consider Dead Money to be a survival horror experience. It's not just because of the limited resources like ammo and healing. Rather, much like in survival horror, your gun can also be used for more than killing. I mentioned earlier about the new accessory on your neck. Well, it turns out speakers and radios across the town emit a frequency that clashes with your collar, making a beeping sound, and you know what happens when it occurs too much. So whenever you hear that beeping, the game switches from tense exploration to full stop, I need to shut off that blasphemous tech. For radio, you need to psych yourself up, run into the room, hoping you find the device to turn it off. For the speakers, you'll need to keep your eyes peeled above. But here's where the firearm comes in. If you find a speaker and don't want to move close to it, pull out the ranged weapon of choice and shoot it like using a pop gun at a carnival. I know this may sound like a really basic thing. The gun can shoot other things besides enemies. Really reinventing the wheel here, Alex. By letting the gun be used for more than killing an enemy, your arsenal feels more like tools. Think of titles like Resident Evil, where the gun can take out enemies, but often what they do is buy time. A quick stun to book it out of a close encounter, or think of Amnesia the Bunker. The game's revolver can also be used to open locks at the risk of a loud bang attracting the monster. Using the gun like this, your character may not be a ranger with a big iron on his hip, but rather a clever character in a horror movie the audience is rooting for. It adds to the expansion's more puzzle-like approach. This isn't another day in the Mojave for your near late-game character. This is the Sierra Madre Casino, and you gotta make the most of the hand you're dealt. Speaking of bad hands, your fellow survivors are quite the bunch. Your first is the one I find the most unsettling. Walking into the police station, you see a nightkin in a cage. As you descend further into the basement, a voice talks to you, requesting you to take something further in and play it for the dog above. When you do, the voice from the basement takes over, going by the title God, and you realize those two are of different minds in the same body. Maybe it was the sudden realization of this, but even playing this again, dread creeped in that both these personalities could turn on me in a second, grabbing my character and snapping his bones like a bobby pin. And if you're role-playing, you have a choice of who to let out for the heist. It's unsettling, but interesting. Then there's Dean Domino. Yep, that Dean. Once a star singer in the pre-war, the ghoul has been surviving here for quite a while. He's probably my favorite character in the expansion. Granted, I'm biased to Joshua overall, but Dean is still cool. When you're looking for the guy, traps are scattered about. Bear traps, trip wires, grenade bouquets, the works. When you finally encounter each other, he asks you to grab a seat that maintains the charm he had before his skin peeled off. And a few lines in, he tells you not to make any sudden movements. There's a bomb under your chair, and he wants some answers. I enjoy Domino. He's clever for lasting this long, and being the only link to the pre-world you can talk to, with a fantastic vocal performance by Barry Dennen. While he may tell you some things, the man's got his secrets, and he will certainly try to hide his rougher edges. In fact, his attitude to you will vary depending on what you say to him. I used a barter check talking to him, and his ego didn't take kindly to that, yet he didn't express his displeasure until it was too late. And the last of your group is Christine. She's got her own set of mysteries that will evolve as time goes along. Right now, her voice is indisposed, and the camera glitched a bit, so this was my first view of her. I love this part of the expansion. The gameplay and story are right on the same page. Resources are scarce, but you're not getting into a huge amount of fights, so it feels alright. With your allies, it feels like you can't really trust them. You have to put in effort into convincing them to work together. And you can't just discard them because if one of your collars goes off, everyone else's will too. Here's where I started to struggle with dead money. And that's part 2, the heist. Once the gang's all here, Father Elijah tells you the Sierra Madre is tied to the opening fireworks. If you can trigger that, then you're in like Flynn. Everyone has a part to play in that show happening. So you shepherd your allies of circumstance to their spots. But when you get there, they express refusal at their position, so you need to do an extra step to stay in their good graces. And this is where my problems begin. As someone who's knee-deep in the uncanny pool that is survival horror, one of the moving pieces about it I've been noticing is crucial is its mechanical pacing. The wave of high action, like boss fights or enemy encounters, down to moments where you can catch your breath, like entering a safe room or slow, low-stakes exploration. I've replayed Resident Evil 7 and Village at least 5 times each. And a lot of that comes down to how fantastic the pacing is. Those games tread that careful balance of horror while also having quiet time to prime you for the next big moment. That's something I don't see here. Dead Money is an oppressive experience. It's intended that way. But when every moment has the same amount of tension, where you're not given time to reset, it all blurs together and cheapens the overall whole. There's never a moment in Dead Money where you can relax. Even the hub area of the villa has the ghost inhabitants around it. In other zones, there are red clouds that damage you, radios and speakers hiding from view, and even more enemies. All the while, you're scraping by for resources, your poker chips being a way to get more supplies if you're running out. But I never found a regular Stimpak code, so I had to settle for junk food and breakfast cereals to patch up my crippled limbs. At first, I was taking Domino's advice about surviving this place. Be careful and take it slow. If you don't keep your wits about you, adios, bucko. But when the pacing never changed, and it felt like a stretched out version of Part 1, now with more of a focus on combat, as your allies refuse to do their parts unless you do an additional task, like giving Dog 2 bodies to eat, which means engaging in more combat, with a lack of supplies, I started to get impatient and picked up my pace, which led to a lot of careless deaths. That and the constant backtracking to find objectives to progress further. I felt a lot of dread in this section, both from the intended parts, and the other, the frustration playing it. Though the trap placement is really good in Dead Money. I met many untimely deaths not watching where I was going, and they were my welcoming committee to the afterlife. In the red clouds, if you linger for too long, you'll take damage, so you want to head out quickly. It's about speed, not grace. Dead Money disagrees, as they've placed traps in the clouds. As you step away from this hazard, a bear trap crunches its teeth into your leg. It's so mean, but I respect what they were going for. The part that makes it even more frustrating is if enemies are around, which is highly likely as you try to avoid unnecessary fights, you won't be able to sleep in beds to heal. So if you're at a few dots of health, it might be a while before getting back to full. There's one section that highlights all these parts into an unfortunate circumstance. So when you get your allies to their respective spots, climb up the bell tower, light the fireworks, and open the Sierra Madre, you need to backtrack to the villa, then enter the casino. There's a code for super stim packs on top, but no machine to use them. As you open the door, ghost inhabitants are drawn towards you, and now it's a mad dash to your objective. Here was my particular problem. I had 2 hit points left. One shot would just destroy my character. A character that was built with a melee playstyle in mind. So if an enemy coughed 6 feet away from me, I got the game over screen. So I ran as fast as my legs would carry me, forgetting the traps I snuck past half an hour ago. In one of my attempts, I drank a cocktail from a supply cache, and my character got the addiction perk. It was unlucky, but pretty on brand for the oppressive experience. After a bunch of retries, I finally made it to the casino, passed out, and then woke up in the lobby. Eventually, I found a first aid box. It's about time, I thought, excited to get some health back with however many stim packs Dead Money was willing to give. Maybe I was wrong about the pacing. No cigar. I would drink bottles of dirty water and like it. Though I did find an MK1 auto dock a bit later. In Part 3, the casino, I still felt frustrated playing it. The game throws a lot of unkillable hologram enemies you either sneak past or get impatient and speedrun. And the speaker radio mechanic gets pretty old. But the game's story and ending were awesome, well worth the frustration I felt. The Sierra Madre never opened, so exploring it feels like walking through a time capsule of the old world, similar to exploring a museum after it's closed. The holographic security really adds to that idea. And the style of this place is so cool. I'm not very familiar with architecture besides Art Deco, but this is some good stuff. You reconvene with your allies to get into the vault. Their fates will depend on how you've been treating them. Yeah, sorry Domino, my bad. While this is going on, you can put the pieces together of what happened to this place. You can see how Frederick Sinclair, the owner of the casino, built this as a monument to his love for the star Vera Keys, and how he missed the signals that made this place what it is today. How he couldn't let go after learning Vera and Domino were going to rob him blind, and how this place that functioned as a safe haven from the world became a tomb for those within it. Because once the bombs fell, the casino trapped the inhabitants inside, and the holographic security dealt with all the guests as threats. Vera died, trapped in her room. A hologram replays the final moments forever. The broadcast that lured your character and so many others here wasn't a welcome. It was a cry for help. As you make it to the vault underground, you're given the climax of the casino. Letting go has been a prevalent idea in Dead Money. It's the theme of the Sierra Madre, the idea to disengage from desire, no matter how strong. It's easier said than done, of course, but you can see that idea represented in the other characters too. Dog/God only attain peace when they let go of their individual aspects and meld into one mind, walking into the metaphorical river. In my playthrough, Domino's greed is what killed him. He spent so long hoping for the Sierra Madre's treasure, and when given the chance to escape, he refused, wanting the prize all to himself. Christine let go of her desire for revenge against Father Elijah, not because he was redeemed, but because revenge has a way of coming back to hurt the one committing it. And the mastermind of the heist refused to let go of his fury for the NCR and the Brotherhood of Steel for rejecting him. The treasure of the Sierra Madre is a way of getting back at them. As he says to the courier about the heist, we're plundering history. And this climax is your way of engaging with those themes. In the vault there are a bunch of gold bars. They're extremely valuable, but are 35 pounds each. There are about 37 inside, and you can't carry them all. Now there have been stories of those who found ways to glitch this section and carry all 37 back to the Mojave, and that's pretty funny. For those who play ball with the game's themes, this is a great moment. Everything about the Sierra Madre, the style of the casino, the ghost enemies trapped in chemical suits, the heist, and the treasure that lies below have all been about holding on to the past. Leaving the gold bars on the table, maybe taking a few in your pockets as a souvenir, represents your acknowledgement that you can't have it all. If you cling to the past or your desires too strongly, you lose out on the future and the gift that is the present. And making a connection to self here, high school literature discussion style, I appreciate this moral quite a bit. I've certainly had some resentments I've held on to, aspirations where I clung on too tightly. I got bitter when I didn't reach them and frustrated at those who did. Why didn't I have that, I would think, and downplay the achievements of others to feel better about myself? But that bitterness never helps. There's a line in the book, Ego is the Enemy, that seems quite appropriate here. Never turn a minor inconvenience into a massive sore. The wound will fester, become infected, and kill you. This is the fate destined for Father Elijah, but can be approached in 2 ways. One is a straightforward battle, mono e security turrets. The other is more of a poetic fate I'm in favor for. When Father Elijah makes his way down to the vault, you can hide as he enters. sneak around as he basks in the vault's treasures, reading a certain entry in the terminal and trapping him inside. He's now the richest man in the apocalypse, and the total is his remaining life trapped in a cage of the past. Satisfying and thematically appropriate. A fine way to end the expansion. Just before leaving, Christine replaces the broadcast for the Sierra Madre, reminding a certain courier that the chance to begin again can occur every day, not in the walls of the casino, but in the hearts of those you love and those who love you. And I think that's a beautiful lesson to remember, even when we walk that lonesome road. Now that we're on the last leg of the journey, I want to do a personal ranking of the expansions. I want to mention I'm ranking these based off personal preference. Each one has got great strengths, but I gotta be true to myself on this one. My least favorite was Dead Money. I love the story, but the gameplay was a bit frustrating. Next is Old World Blues. The exploration was cool, while there were some great jokes. Overall, the plot didn't grab me. Second is Honest Hearts. I felt what the story was doing was something really interesting and appreciated the different approach to the open world. And my favorite is the topic of this section, Lonesome Road. I had been curious about this particular experience for years. I'd heard out-of-context mentions of it and only knew it should be played near the end of your journey. So I went in with as vague a picture as I could. And I loved it. I loved the structure, I loved the pacing, I loved the story. It was incredible. Starting with a quest titled The Reunion, traveling to a wreckage outside of Prim into the Divide. A harsh desert with sand blowing all over the place. This setup does two interesting bits. It subverts the idea of intro slides. Your exposition is the howling winds. And the second, it builds up a confrontation. Through the DLCs, there's been mention of another courier, one who is hoping to find you. He's even hinted at in the base game, the one who turned down delivering the platinum chip when he saw your name on the list. Lonesome Road is not just the game's final challenge with foes that pack quite a punch, or being the last DLC made for the game. It's an end to that search, and I really enjoyed it. Heading to the Hopesville Silo Bunker, you find the only companion in the expansion, a prototype iBot named Eddie, similar to the one in the base game, but this particular one's got a mission. With insistence from his creator before their project was canned and the machine scrapped, he needs to find refuge in the Enclave, and he's the only one who can interact with the machines of the Divide. So you and Eddie strike a partnership, making your way across the Divide together. Where Lonesome Road is unique compared to the others is its linear focus. The other expansions have given the player open zones to explore. Think back to Old World Blues' Big Empty or Honest Heart's Zion National Park, with an emphasis on backtracking for quest objectives, much like Dead Money with the casino town split off into zones. The Divide does have opportunities to explore, but it's structured with a direct endpoint in mind. We start here, and the goal is to reach here. It's not an open space, it's a trek, a journey to a destination. In that regard, it feels like a post-apocalyptic road trip, and I love that. I used to take road trips with my family all the time. In the past, they were accompanied with a DS and a copy of Dragon Quest IX, playing co-op with the fella in shotgun. But growing up, I focused more on the open road. And there's something so beautiful about putting a location behind you as a new landscape welcomes you to the present. Towns, forests, lakes, anything. I love when games capture that feeling of a journey. An easy way to do that is with linear focus. Making the route approached in one particular way gives a feeling of progress, and small open areas you can poke your head into out of curiosity feels like a reprieve, a pit stop in the grand scheme of the trip. Lonesome Road captures this feeling really well. About 30 minutes in, you find a laser detonator, used to set off small warheads that are roadblocks for main objectives, but can open smaller areas for gear or additional lore scattered about. If you're feeling really gutsy, you can head to a section you accidentally launch a nuke at and explore the wreckage, filled with tough customers. In its structure and the fact it's a post-apocalypse, it's comparable to the movie version of I Am Legend, or even the first Last of Us, and that title came out 2 years after Lonesome Road. And the focus on two companions traveling a wasteland together contributes to that too. The Divide certainly made me appreciate Eddie a lot, not just because he could hack and was good in a fight, but because I actually grew quite fond of him. Sometimes I feel like a cynical old man who finds it tough to connect with companions in RPGs. Maybe it's a feeling of been there, done that, or just not as emotionally invested as the game was hoping for. That wasn't the case with Eddie. I can't quite pin down what it is. Maybe it's how the Divide starves you for someone to talk to. Maybe it's his backstory that's adorable and heartbreaking, framing the character with a television show comparable to E.T. with the phrase "fly far, fly fast," serving both as a line from the show, but also a reminder for Eddie to keep moving to fulfill his master's request. Or the fact the game had me laughing at some conversations. Whatever it was, the trek through the Divide was a lot more fun with Eddie along for the ride. And that brings me to the only other character in Lonesome Road, one who will hijack Eddie to communicate, the other courier, Ulysses. Oh boy, where to begin with this guy? I'll start with this. Ulysses was a character I find myself appreciating the more I get to know him. What started as a mystery, positioned as a carrot on a stick, turned into an answer I found both satisfying and complex, rich in a way I wasn't expecting. When I heard murmurings about this courier, I assumed this was going to be some long-lost best friend you forgot about. Getting shot in the head does make recollecting a tall order. But that wasn't the case. What's there is a lot more interesting. Ulysses talks to your character about a past you are unfamiliar with, and claiming this is your home. The man is a dispenser of great lines. I found myself constantly writing his dialogue in my notes to reference for this section and chew on. One was a lesson he learned from you. Home isn't where you were born in this world. Before the events of the base game, the Divide started to become a prosperous settlement thanks to a lone courier who braved the storms and made deliveries for its people. This is the character you've been playing in New Vegas. You gave the people hope. The Divide was the second coming, a nation on the rise that brought people together, both of the East and West. This place had so much potential, a sentiment that Ulysses truly believed. And just as you were the one who made this place possible, you're the one who destroyed it. The NCR and Legion saw the potential for the Divide and began making claims for it. You were tasked with delivering a package from the NCR, a relic from the Enclave, to make sense of the silos. Instead, the package went off, triggering the warheads lying below and creating an earthquake. This act is what sealed the Divide's doom. It's what caused the devastation, the harsh blowing sands that stripped the skin of both the Legion and the NCR into becoming the mindless ghouls known as the Marked Men. Pain makes for strange allies. Ulysses references the NCR and the Legion as the Bear and Bull, the icons of their respective factions. He is a man that focuses on symbols. He did so for the tribe he grew up in, the Twisted Hares, before being submerged by the Legion as Caesar conquered them. He took the name Ulysses from a book. This could be referencing the President Ulysses S. Grant or the Latin variant for the book The Odyssey. I'm not quite sure which. But I find it interesting that the name translates in English to wrathful or full of anger. Your character taught Ulysses a lesson he would never forget, that individuals have the capacity to create nations and to destroy them, even in ignorance. Symbols turn into images left over from the past, decaying like the ruined buildings in the post-apocalypse. What Ulysses is going for is to show you that devastation. The Divide is a monument built on your innocent sin. The warheads scattered about, the ruined buildings and towers you walk through, the deadly tunnelers and deathclaws are all a result of what you did. He also realized that the larger nations would never allow something like the former Divide to exist without displaying control over it. Understanding the futility of both factions, he sends missiles to destroy them both. Not in their entirety, but to cut their throats and let them shrivel and die. If it happens to one, the other will follow suit before long. In his words, burn the flags, begin again. But Ulysses is not an agent of a philosophy. What I find makes him fascinating is not just what he wants to do, but the why that drives him. And it isn't complex. It's quite understandable. Ulysses is not a concept, he's a person, and the one we talk to is a person who lost all hope for a time. An understanding that this is how the world works. But the Divide brought that hope back. You brought it back. The actions of one contributed to the whole. You made him believe again. And then you took it away. You're conversing with a man who crawled his way out of the abyss, only to fall right back in. His line, "I don't blame you for the Divide, I blame you for what you made me see," can be interpreted not just as the destruction, but even the good that made the bad hurt so much more. I find that compelling. I notice Obsidian has this really engaging way of making player characters have interesting backstories, not rooted in specific family lines, but more actions from the past and how your character looks at them, like the Fatebinder in Tyranny, or the Exile in Knights of the Old Republic 2. The Courier is another in that category. You play the character, but in this telling you also acknowledge that they had a life before you embodied their actions, and the picture of them shifts into something different. They're you, but also take a life of their own. What do you think about that? That's a question Ulysses gets you to ponder. The Divide is a dangerous place. It's got some of the toughest enemies in the game. The Marked Men wield a bunch of different weapons from range to melee. The wildlife of Deathclaws hurt as much as you'd expect, and the new enemy type Tunnelers aren't so bad by themselves. but in a group they're vicious, and there's plenty of landmines planted into those ruins for those unfortunate enough to step on them. In other words, I blew up quite a bit. As I attempted to disarm the explosives with bullets, I pulled out the .45 auto pistol, a light shining in darkness, a gift from honest hearts, and I thought about a particular quote from Joshua Graham. In a world filled with misery and uncertainty, it is a great comfort to know that, in the end, there is a light in the darkness. I find Joshua Graham and Ulysses to be quite similar. Both served the Legion at one point in their lives, and both have reached lows that are guaranteed in the human experience. But where it brought Ulysses to the same cycle of hope and despair, deciding to destroy the larger foundations to begin again, Joshua found the tenets of his religion. He found family and purpose in the Dead Horse's tribe. That is the fire that keeps him going, and will continue to do so until life leaves his body. I don't mean to say this as religion to be the solution for everything. What I mean to say is that purpose is a powerful thing. It's so important for everyone. A lack of it can be a very scary place to be. And I think it's up to all of us to find our own purpose and fulfill that however we can. That could be in family, community, friends, work, religion, loving another, whatever it is. It can't be decided for you. It's a conscious choice you must make for yourself. I certainly don't have it all figured out on my end. I've got much to improve in that regard. But I will say, making videos has gotten me out of bed during some dark times in my life, and so have the relationships with my family and friends. And every once in a while, when that purpose aligns with the parts of yourself you're proud of, compassion, creation, love, it lightens your soul. And all the other riches in the world couldn't hold a fraction to that feeling right then and there. That is something I saw lacking in Ulysses. His purpose was to destroy and bring in the new, without an idea of what that new would be, functioning like one of the missiles he fires, causing devastation where it landed, and leaving a husk in what remained. That's what I find so engaging about the final encounter. When you meet face to face, whether with Eddie or not, you have a conversation with him. You could just jump right into a fight if you wish, but I find it compelling to debate him, both with skill checks and regular dialogue. You can talk Ulysses down. Not from firing the nukes, those aren't encrypted, but from his outlook. You can make the argument that just as you had breathed life into the Divide, so could he, and what it represented, the hope of what it was, will always be with him for as long as he lives. That's the beauty of the title Lonesome Road. It implies you'll be taking it alone. But you had Eddie, and even Ulysses was with you as you traversed the wreckage of the Divide. Ulysses, much like myself and others playing this, believed ourselves to walk that dusty trail by our lonesome. But there's always been a companion with us. There always is. It's our memories. Of what we love, of what we lost, and that unbroken connection that links us together by the simple fact that we're human. We will carry that wherever we go. Until we forget, in which case they'll still be there with us, even if we don't recognize them. And it works. Ulysses will see your point. The two of you will fight off the marked men breaking down the doors, two couriers fighting for the chance to deliver something greater than mindless suffering. Whatever you choose to do with the rockets, you'll get the ending slides showing your choices, and the courier will leave you a final message. My favorite lines from it are this:
If war doesn't change, men must change, and so must their symbols. Even if it is nothing at all, know what you follow, courier.
What I get from this line is that we must learn from the past and commit ourselves to what we find purpose in. Even if it means nothing at the end of the day, or seen as a wrong in the grand scheme, we should continue to take the path, because it is what keeps us going, and that's all it needs to be. After finishing these campaigns, a couple of words came to mind. Experimental. Interesting. Funny. Frustrating. Engaging. Fun. Hopeful. I had a great time playing through all these expansions, and it really made me appreciate Fallout New Vegas more than I do. I hear mention of this game all the time online, despite it being released a while ago. I think a lot of that is a testament to how much care was put into it, base game and expansions. I've had the game crash multiple times playing through these sessions, and I still consider it one of my favorite games. Because even if something didn't click, I can see the intention behind what they were trying to do and can respect that. Plus, I'm pretty excited to come back to this in a while and play it again, see if I noticed anything new or a different reading of something I thought I figured out. It's like a classic novel in that way. You'll get something new out of it as time goes along. And I'm no Mr. New Vegas, but thanks a whole bunch for watching. Hope you got some entertainment out of this. I got a few ideas in the works, so subscribe if you're interested in more videos from this channel, and maybe play New Vegas while you wait. Drink plenty of water, and take care of yourself on the journey of life. I'll see you around.